Let's just say it, nothing else in entertainment has created buzz like this in a long time. Not this week, not this year. The Michael Jackson biopic, just called Michael, stormed into theaters, and it didn't just succeed, it steamrolled. In its first weekend, people in the US and Canada spent nearly $100 million on tickets. Yeah, nearly $100 million, and that's just domestic numbers. Look outside North America. The total hit $217 million globally. That's not just impressive for a music biopic, it basically destroyed the old records. Bohemian Rhapsody? It was huge, but its opening weekend was $51 million. Straight Outta Compton did $60 million. Michael just left those numbers in the dust. Studios guessed Michael might pull in $70 million on opening weekend, which would have been a win. In reality, $97 million. Even the folks who made the movie were surprised. The Lionsgate chairman came out saying they were seeing massive engagement across every conceivable audience segment, which, in regular language, just means every single type of person showed up. And yet, the critics hated it. Like, proper hated it. Drama-free, formulaic, estate-controlled excuse to sell more albums, sanitized to the point of being translucent. That's what one critic called it. That's not even really an insult, but somehow it stings worse. It basically says you made a hyper-polished ad, not a story anyone can believe. So you end up with this weird split, right? Critics pan the movie, audiences go in droves. Not unusual. It's happened before. People don't always want what critics praise. Sometimes, you just want to revisit something that made you feel alive as a kid. For millions, Michael Jackson's music does that. People came for nostalgia, for the thrill, to lose themselves in Billie Jean and be teenagers again, if only for a little while. But the story gets messier. Let's not dodge that, since it matters. This movie cost close to $200 million. For a biopic, that's wild money. Why? Well, part of it was a legal disaster. Partway through, they finished principal filming, only to realize they'd shot major scenes involving the Jordan Chandler case. These were abuse allegations from the early 1990s. But here's the kicker. The terms of that settlement legally barred the Jackson estate from ever mentioning Chandler in a film. At all. So, they had to rip out and reshoot a good chunk of the movie, at a cost of up to $50 million. The estate footed the bill. The director and writer went back, chopped off the story at 1988, a neat way to avoid all the messy stuff that came after. The film ends with title cards, "His story continues," which, honestly, rubbed a lot of viewers the wrong way. Even the Jackson family wasn't united behind this project. Janet spoke out. So did Paris, Michael's daughter, calling the whole thing Fantasyland. When the subject's own daughter uses a phrase like that about her father's supposed biography, you have to take a breath and wonder what's really going on. Now, this next bit isn't easy to talk about, because these are real people, real trauma. After the film's release, James Safechuck, one of the men who said Michael Jackson abused him as a child, a story told in the documentary Leaving Neverland, shared a statement. He didn't take shots at the movie itself. Instead, he spoke directly to other survivors, acknowledging how painful it can be to see billboards, commercials, glowing praise all over again for someone who, for them, represents hurt. He talked about how it's not just celebrities, it's the priest, the beloved coach, the step-parent, people with power and praise, who also hide pain. His message was honest. You're not alone. Rely on your loved ones. Telling your story is part of healing. Dan Reed, the guy behind Leaving Neverland, wasn't so gentle. He straight up said that this movie's success shows how much people just don't want to deal with the abuse claims. People want the music, want to dance, and block out the rest. And he asked the big question, how do you tell someone's real story while carefully avoiding the hardest, darkest, most pivotal parts? That's the real tension here. Millions of people have a deep emotional connection to Michael Jackson's music. Thriller, Off the Wall, Bad, those albums changed people, created milestones in their lives. That joy, that connection, it's real. But so are the allegations, the lawsuits, the testimonies. Both things are absolutely true at the same time, and holding them together isn't comfortable. We all want simple stories. Heroes are heroes, villains are villains. But that's not how life works, and Michael Jackson's story is as complicated as they come. Sitting in that uneasy gray area is kind of the only honest response. What's really wild is how the film's success doesn't resolve these contradictions, it just cranks up the volume. Almost $100 million in a weekend says that people want to remember Michael the star, the performer, the childhood soundtrack. It also says a film that sanitizes the past can do great, sometimes even better than one that engages with it. Does that mean people don't care about the darkness? Or does it just mean we're tired and 2 hours of nostalgia is all we can handle right now? You have to decide what you think. Here's one thing I'm sure of. Survivors like Safechuck shouldn't be erased just because the movie wants to stop at 1988. When he spoke out quietly, not lashing out but reaching for others who might be hurting. That felt more genuine and more brave than anything a glossy blockbuster can offer. The truth is, some stories are just too complicated, too big, to ever fit inside one movie or one narrative. Maybe that's the real takeaway this weekend. The story is bigger than the biopic, bigger than the numbers. But to really get why this film blew up, why people are so charged about it, you have to go back to where it all started. Michael Jackson's life started somewhere more ordinary, more cramped than anything you might picture. Gary, Indiana, 1958. A tough little city where steel mills ruled and opportunity was hard to find. The Jackson family lived on top of each other in a tiny house. Catherine played piano and sang. The older boys started putting together harmonies right there in their living room. Michael, the seventh of 9 kids, stood in the center of it all, soaking up music the way other kids absorbed sunlight. Even back then, before fame, before the controversies, there was this spark in the center of the chaos. And it's still burning. For better or worse, all these years later. From the very beginning, he stood out. You could see it when he was just a little kid. The way he moved to music wasn't just cute or quirky. It wasn't your usual kid spinning around the kitchen. Even as a toddler, Michael Jackson's talent wasn't just unusual. It was shocking. His brothers saw it right away, and his mother too, her eyes lighting up at the way he could mimic anything he saw on TV. But the person who saw it most clearly and used it as a tool was his father. Joseph Jackson is hard to sum up in a sentence. On the one hand, he was the one who saw the possibility of turning raw talent into something that could change their family's world. He wasn't gentle about it. He made their gift into a business. Rehearsals weren't a choice. Mess up and you paid for it. When people say Joseph Jackson was strict, harsh, honestly, that barely covers it. Michael didn't hide from that pain in interviews. He talked about the constant fear, the beatings, the shame about his looks. Imagine being a child and having your own father tell you your face is wrong and that your nose is too wide, long before the rest of the world ever said a word. Yet, all this time, he was performing at a level that left adults speechless. By the time Michael hit 11, the Jackson 5 had landed a deal at Motown. Suddenly, these kids from Gary, Indiana, weren't just singing for fun. They were on national television, pumping out smash hits like I Want You Back and ABC. They exploded into America's living rooms. And right at the front was Michael, small in size but gigantic in voice, the kind of talent you only see once in a generation. Everybody watched him. They couldn't help it. But fame like that, especially at that age, comes with a cost people don't talk about enough. Michael's whole childhood just slipped away. While other kids were out playing, falling down, making memories and mistakes, he was living on tour buses, working in studios, standing under hot lights for audiences of total strangers. He didn't get to grow up the usual way. He grew up backwards, or maybe sideways, in public. The gap between how everyone saw him and who he actually was inside just growing wider every year. The 70s brought more success, more records, bigger crowds. Then came 1979 and Off the Wall, Michael's first adult solo album, and the first big splash of his creative partnership with Quincy Jones. The music was lively, elegant, almost sparkling in its confidence. Listeners fell in love, but Michael didn't think the world took it seriously enough. Not really. He felt unseen, even after everything he'd given, as if no matter how hard he tried, it was never going to be enough. That dissatisfaction pushed him even harder. And so, Thriller. 1982. That word is still loaded even now. 7 top 10 singles, the best-selling album ever. The music video for Thriller wasn't just a promo clip, it was something brand new. A horror movie wrapped around a pop song, showing people what music videos could actually be. Beat It, Billie Jean, Wanna Be Startin' Somethin'. If you were alive then, you remember. It didn't matter who you were or where you lived. Thriller found you, seeped into your life like sunlight through windows. And Michael? The moonwalk, the single white glove, the red leather jacket, became more than a superstar. He became a myth, something beyond ordinary fame. The kind of celebrity that starts to break apart what it means to be a person. But under all that, the pressure kept grinding him down. Being watched that closely year after year takes a toll. You could see the changes, not just in his music, but in his face, his skin. People started talking, and they never stopped. Vitiligo, surgeries, he said so much about the pain he felt, but instead of meeting him with understanding, the world gave him nicknames and tabloid cruelty. Wacko Jacko. It stung. It stuck. He tried to build something new with Neverland Ranch in the late 80s, the wild fairy tale home with a zoo, rides, and a theater. He called it the childhood he'd never had, and looking at the way he poured himself into those fantastical spaces, I believe he meant it. He just wanted, for once, to be a kid. Some people say it's sad, some say it's worrisome. Both, probably. The 90s saw another creative peak, with albums like Bad and Dangerous, but they brought more scrutiny, endless rumors, lawsuits, and a storm of accusations and questions that never seemed to end. He tried twice to settle into married life, first with Lisa Marie Presley, then with Debbie Rowe. Neither marriage lasted, though he was a dedicated father to his 3 kids, always going to great lengths to shield them from camera flashes and curious strangers. He looked like a man torn in half, desperate for love, but always afraid the world would never let him rest. It all crashed down on June 25, 2009. Michael was 50, planning a huge comeback tour, 50 sold-out shows at London's O2 Arena. Everyone wanted him back on stage. The world buzzed with anticipation. He never made it. He died in his home that day of acute propofol and benzodiazepine intoxication. Medications his doctor, Conrad Murray, had been giving him just so he could sleep. Murray went to jail for involuntary manslaughter, but none of that brought Michael back. The most famous entertainer on earth, alone, exhausted, relying on powerful drugs to find even a little rest. The grief after he died felt different, not just newsworthy, but personal. Millions of people mourned, people who'd never met him but felt like they knew him. That was his gift, his music, his art. It got inside people, intertwined with who they were. It still does. Now, more than a decade later, we're still wrestling with his story. People keep arguing about his legacy, struggling to pin down the man behind the myth. A blockbuster film just brought in over $200 million on opening weekend, showing the safe, polished version of his life, the officially approved narrative that stops before things get truly difficult. The messier, unresolved chapters are still out there, still raw and bitter, dividing people who all care about this story, even if they care in totally different ways. Michael Jackson's life resists simplicity. It was strange and dazzling and painful and beautiful and tragic. Maybe the best way to understand it is to hold all those truths together at once, without trying to flatten his story into a single explanation. Because with Michael, the truth's never neat, and it rarely sits still. So, have you watched the movie? Are you curious? Or is this all just too much to even think about? However you feel, I genuinely want to know. Drop your thoughts below. If you're drawn to stories like this, subscribe, hit like, whatever fits. Let's keep talking about the complicated stuff together. See you next time.